if you feel like you have a bigger purpose in the world, that you want to have children and you're committed to that, but you also feel like there's this other talent that you have, there's something else that you can do, and you feel committed to that, and you want to really pursue that in a very zealot-like way, should you be permitted to do that? And if you are you then sort of basically in a position where people can really, with some degree of confidence, call you a bad mother? And I really wrestle with that. I don't know.
Well,
and this gives me a question for you.
Let me give the guys a guy's take on this kind of thing. I'm in my 70s. I have 5 children, 6 grandchildren. I was asked recently by somebody, what does it mean to be a good father? And I said, pay attention, be present, know your children. Don't let those moments go by. They'll never come again. Be present, slow down, sit still. Don't be too busy to know your children. Listen. Now, I didn't do that. When I was 18 years old, I became a father. I dropped out of college. I went to work full time. I went back to a community college at night. I ended up a scholarship kid, a full-time student at Northwestern University, and a full-time employee at a printing plant, and a father and husband. And I was too busy to get to know my children, who are in their 50s now. And the 2 who were born to me when I first came up out of, my teenage years. I've had other children since. I didn't get to know them. I was always gone. I was always busy. I was a full-time student. I worked an 8-hour shift every day, and I got overtime took overtime whenever I could get it. So, I mean, I missed out. I really did, and I didn't. I mean, I was really driven. I was just too busy to know my kids, and I think that's, was expected of me. I wasn't expected to do anything but what I did, something like that. I don't know.
Well, can I ask you a follow-up question on that? Because
this is not the Glenn Loury confessional hour. I want everybody to know that. We're going to change the subject soon.
But I want to stay on this for a moment, because when you and John McWhorter are talking, and you refer often, just as an aside, to the ongoing project of your autobiography, I'm really fascinated by that. And I'm also fascinated by part of the conversation that you had on a recent podcast with Cornel West, which, if your listeners haven't listened to it, they should, because it's riveting.
Thank you,
Lara. But you talk about, in the process of writing your own story, that it's been a struggle for you. And maybe I'm not putting this correctly and I'm misinterpreting what you said, but what I hear you saying when you talk to John McWhorter, we were talking to Cornel West, is that you have a cover story that you have. You have a cover story about various things, about your intellectual conversions or ideations, how they've changed over time. You have a cover story about the things that you tell yourself about decisions you've made as a father, as a romantic partner, as an academic. And then there's sort of what's going on underneath. And I'm really curious about that, because, like, is what you just said to me a cover story, or is it really sort of reaching beneath the surface? And I ask that because I think a big part of what I don't know when you're describing what you see as your failings as a father is what your kids think, and the impact on them of the person that you are in the world and the choices that you made. And I'm wondering if you are confronting that in your writing and pushing through into those kind of harder, deeper questions.
Oh, my Lord. This is asked of me by someone whom I know to be a writer, because I admire her writing. And it's so incisive. I think you're really touching on the deepest things. I start this book with a meta reflection on the act of being honest with oneself about, I call it the problem of self-regard. Okay. Now I've got 2 issues. One is know thyself, and the other is to write the thing. Okay. Because I want people to believe me. So there's this issue of establishing credibility, which I think is really very interesting, because it means that you have to disclose discrediting information about yourself in order for the reader to be drawn into credulity with you about what it is that you're saying about yourself, because you have every reason to be self-aggrandizing, to be, to put a cover on it, a cover story for you, not only for myself, but, I can make my story anything I want to make it, and I can be the hero of my story, and I can come out, on top, and you can come and, and if I'm the reader and I'm listening to this, why shouldn't I be cynical about it? Why shouldn't I be very skeptical about it? Why shouldn't I be I said this actually in a conference about Frederick Douglass, who wrote several autobiographies. And everybody's like worshipfully reading the thing and saying, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. This is a performance. He knows we're going to read the thing. This is a guy that's born a slave, okay? Of course, he has a certain claim on our credulity when he tells us about what was going on in his fight for freedom. But if we're really going to be serious readers, we have to take that to a certain extent with a grain of salt. We can't just take that at face value. We have to interrogate that. So there's that problem. That's a serious problem. This is my meta reflection. This is not the book. This is thinking about the writing of the book. But there's also the self-knowledge, self-honesty, because there's self-delusion. And that's where I'm talking about the cover story. I'll give some examples. You asked me about my children. I don't know if I want to talk to you about my children. When I didn't make it as a full professor at the age of 33 at Harvard University in the economics department, the first Black that had been appointed there, I was supposed to go on and write a bunch of papers and be a Harvard economist professor and be a Black Harvard economist professor and be the first one to be the Black Paul Samuelson or something like that. And it didn't work out. I ended up at the Kennedy School of Government and I became a public intellectual, amongst other things. There's nothing wrong with that. I think I did okay. But it didn't work out as a high-flown theoretical economist up there with the Paul Samuelsons of the world, the first Black to, do that kind of thing. It didn't work out. Now, what really happened? Was it that the economics department wasn't especially welcoming for Black people? Hell no, it wasn't, man. You had to have been there. It was as staid and stick up the butt as it could possibly be. Everybody was sitting there looking like this with their toe tapping, waiting to see if I was going to do anything worth acknowledging. The offices hid behind secretaries who were located behind 10-foot high oak doors on a pristine hallway, and you had no sense that there was any life in there. That's a damn good cover story. Affirmative action. I'm an affirmative action. Oh, woe is me. I'm affirmative action. They don't think I'm qualified. I'm Black. Surely there were incidents where, like, John Kenneth Galbraith shook my hand without ever actually turning his head to look me in the face. That happened, which I could nurse into a general sense of injury by the fact that I'm Black. But what really happened is that I choked. I didn't know if I was good enough and I was afraid of failing. I didn't really allow myself the opportunity to fail. I bailed. So, cover story and the real story. I'm running around on my wife. My wife gets pregnant. She loses the baby. It was, fibroids. Cover story, you know how it goes. Oh my God, there's a terrible thing, it's a grief, consolation. Real story. Secretly, relief. It's the kind of thing that you would put in one of your characters' mouths to say. There's a lot of stuff like that. I persuaded myself that I was a born-again Christian and that the hand of God had come down and had touched my life. That I had been empowered with the Spirit of God to witness and to, pray in tongues. There's a lot of stuff that's like that. I persuaded myself that the neocons that I had been consorting with really didn't care anything about Black people. When in fact, I was just so lonely and so hungry for the re-embrace of the Black community that I turned my back on my neocon friends, claiming that they were racially indifferent. When in fact, it's complicated. Sure, some of them were relatively racially indifferent, and some of them were trying to muddle through what's some really hard stuff. Liberals mugged by reality who didn't know what to do about crime and homelessness and poverty and whatnot. Yeah, I don't, I mean, on the kids, we got three groups of kids here, Laura. We got the kids that Charlene and I had when I was 18 and 19 years old. That's Lisa and Tammy. And then Alden, who was born out of wedlock when I was 20 years old, whom I didn't acknowledge until he was a teenager. And then we've got Glenn and Nehemiah, whose late mother, Linda, and I married in 1983, and who were in their early 30s now, and who were with me and Linda through, Linda and I stuck together through all of the stuff that happened with me in the 1980s, which, I don't have time to talk about here. But basically, the marriage was strained to a breaking point, but it held. We became Christians, and we had these two sons, Glenn and Nehemiah, and they were raised in suburban Boston when I was a completely recovered and rehabilitated, economics professor at Boston University and whatnot, and it was present, perhaps not as much as I should have been. But I did get to know my children a lot better the second time around. I was much more consciously aware of what my responsibilities as a father required of me, and my life partner, my wife, Linda, who passed away from breast cancer 10 years ago, would have accepted nothing less from me. But I think you would probably have to ask them about that. I don't really feel qualified to report what they think of their father. I think they respect their father's accomplishments and his gifts and whatnot. But I think it's really very, very complicated. We had a family reunion a few years ago that blew up into angry argument and shouting and bitterness, and a lot of stuff that is unresolved. So I told you that I didn't need much prompting to talk about myself, but somehow the governing mechanism that I had assumed would be in place did not hold.